Hello, 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 hello. Good evening to those that are joining us, and welcome to our third and final edition of In the Soup for the Summer. I am your host, Kopano Uyana Maruja, and I am a performance artist, a writer, and cultural worker, currently working at Voor, in Ghent, Belgium, as a programmer and dramaturg. And tonight in the Soup, we are going into the conversation around Black emergency. In the Soup is a new format at Voor where we reflect every 2 weeks on the issues that are keeping us up at night, in collaboration with the food artist who prepares a specially made soup in conversation with the topic that we're going over that day. In regards to Black emergency, we have invited two fantastic guests tonight. We have Dorrie Wilson, an independent African-American researcher, writer, and cultural worker currently living in Brussels, Belgium since 2001. And Qondiswa James, a cultural worker living in Cape Town, South Africa. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are in for a treat for sure. In thinking about the concept of Black emergence and Black emergency, I wanted to push us away from only thinking about the context of emergency and the context of white supremacy and white domination that we live under, but also looking for these opportunities that context has created for Black life to emerge and create possibilities of coalition building, possibilities of resistance, possibility of love, possibilities of art, possibility of community building. We are not a reactive people, we are a constructive people. And I want to see how we can have that conversation as opposed to centralizing whiteness in these conversations. In the Soup would not be in the soup without the soup. And tonight we have a roasted red pepper soup prepared by Fiona Hallinan, who is an Irish artist and doctoral student at Lucas School of Arts in Leuven. Usually we have Fiona joining us to extrapolate a little bit about where the content and the concept of the soup for that particular week comes from. But considering the subject matter of tonight and how we want to centralize the conversation around Black people and Black voices, between Fiona and I, we decided that it was most appropriate that Fiona does not join in physical presence, but rather joins us with the words that she prepared for this particular session that I will be sharing with you. So Fiona writes that in preparing and serving food for In the Soup, in recent weeks, I have composed a series of short texts that connect the food served and the topic discussed at each event, and that reflect in different ways upon embodied knowledge and the necessity of care in social change. One of my aims in this may be simply put, integrating soup as a recipe and an offering at discursive events as a way to performatively underscore that what happens in the head cannot be easily separated from what happens in the belly and the body. Food writer and culinary anthropologist Verta May Smart Grosvenor wrote about this better in her essay, The Kitchen Crisis #1, published in 1970. In it, she states, food changes up into the blood, blood into cells, cells into energy, energy changes up into forces which make up your lifestyle. So if one takes a creative, imaginative, loving, serious attitude towards life, everything one does will reflect one's attitude. Hence, when one cooks, this attitude will be served at the table and it will be good. In the context of the conversation about Black emergence and Black emergency, this connection between body and discourse comes into particularly urgent focus. This conversation, like other events in the series, aims to generate discourse that resonates in tangible ways in people's lives. Meanwhile, among the most flagrant and brutal impacts of the racist discourses and power structures that are the long-standing background to this conversation are those which are forcefully visited upon Black bodies. Thinking of food as an example to characterize what I'm doing in writing these texts as food writing is to evoke just one particular domain where Black voices, Black food history, and Black authorship are devastatingly underrepresented. Thinking about food, we have to think radically, chef, food writer, and activist Tunde Wei says in a Time magazine video on racial disparities in the food world and beyond. And food culture is only as dysfunctional or as functional as the wider culture that it exists in, Wei says. There are very little solutions to inequality in the food system that are going to work if they don't come from the voices of the folks who are critically thinking while on the margins. One might observe how discursive exclusion mirrors and relates to the racialized impacts of food poverty in the West and food insecurity globally. Having in this series of events used food to frame, infiltrate, or inoculate the conversations that follow, it should be clear from the foregoing that my role in this particular conversation must primarily be silent, learn from and respond to participants whose lived experiences gives them a level of insight and ethical standing that I, as a white person, do not have in my position. My position within the conversation cannot, of course, be the end of the story. It gives me a particular responsibility to act outside of it. The simple recipe here for roasted red pepper, tomato, and coconut soup is one I make at home to soothe and energize. It will be offered in real life at the live session in Wordt on Thursday, July 30th, and the recipe is offered below for those who would like to make it at home for the online event on Wednesday. Thank you so much, Fiona, for that offering. Before we go into the conversation, a little bit of housekeeping. For those who are watching through the webinar, you'll see that you have a chat function at the very bottom of the Zoom webinar page. And if you have any technical administrative questions, I would suggest that you put them there. If there's anything going wrong with the audio, the sound, the image, please put those questions there so that our technical backend can work on those and rectify those as soon as possible. I won't necessarily be checking the chat, so if you put questions in there, I may not be able to bring them into the conversation. And on the subject of questions, you'll see that at the bottom of your screen, you have a Q&A function. If you have a question, I would recommend that you put it in the Q&A function so that I can give it to or direct it towards our panelists. So I'm going to once again suggest, please don't put the questions in the comment section. Please put the questions in the Q&A so that I can see them and that I can give them to the panelists. You are more than welcome, if there are any technical issues or other administrative questions that you have, to engage directly with Wordt through the direct chat function in the chat box. Or if there are any links that you'd like to share with everyone who's attending, please feel free to share them in the chat. Now that we have had our amuse-bouche, I would like to move on to our entree, our main course. I would like to invite Ms. Dorrie Wilson to please contextualize for us where it is that you are in the world, how it is that you're doing, and what the context of COVID-19 is there for you specifically and for the political situation that you are in.
Hello, everybody. First, I want to thank you, Kopano, for asking me to be a part of this. It's really been inspiring and enriching for me to watch you work and to be able to be with you tonight has really meant a lot to me. So thank you for that. I'm actually in Brussels at the moment, so a little bit less restrictive than probably I imagine you are in Ghent, because it's a little bit more intense there. But nevertheless, the reaction has been, after the people returning from holiday, that the spiking is such that they're doing what I'm calling a soft lockdown. That's what it seems like to me. On a personal note, it's obviously affected me because I had unfortunately lost a family member recently and was unable to travel because of the restrictions. So, it's quite a powerful thing for all of us in many different ways. The other thing, I mean, I have to, you know me, I'm like honest. So, but one of the things I have to say that has been most refreshing and I'm very grateful for is that by teleworking, I am less subject to microaggressions and racist behavior. And I can sit in my little household bubble with the sun streaming through my windows and not have to even consider how to get out of a conversation that I never asked to be in the first place. Okay? So, I mean, I have to, if there is a saving grace for it all, Corona has blessed me to be in myself and in a space that I know is safe because I made it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's so poignant in this time to highlight that difference of experience in moving through the world for Black people, where we are subject to so many microaggressions throughout the day in our personal lives, in our professional lives, and how this context allows some of us who have the privilege of being housed to be able to protect ourselves in that way and the right to protect ourselves in that way. So thank you for foregrounding that and for sharing that with us. I really, really appreciate it. And I really appreciate your presence here tonight. Qondiswa, I would like to invite you as well to share a little bit, if you'd like, about who you are, what you do, where you are in the world, and how you're doing there in relation to COVID and in your personal life and the political situation there.
Hi, everybody and people here. I'm Qondiswa. I'm in South Africa. I'm in Cape Town. So we're also in what I would say, like Dorrie said, a soft lockdown. But also, of course, that depends on where you are, like geographically in Cape Town, but also so not just in provincially, but in cities. And so Cape Town, where I am, we've got an old irritating problem of spatial apartheid, old planning that's still in effect now. And pretty much what this means is that particular people are zoned out on the margins, and that control can be exerted on these people in particular ways. Whereas you can live in the city, which is quite close to the mountain. And even though they say it's level 3, I was surprised to find, driving through Kopano, a place called Camps Bay. Camps Bay is a very, very, very rich, very rich, wealthy, white, but also a lot of European, American, Middle Eastern, kind of very wealthy people buying up land there, etc. Meanwhile, at home, we're having one of the most massive land crises that have ever been in effect in South Africa. People there in Camps Bay are in restaurants, just chilling, hanging out. I think it just seems like people are drinking. I'm not sure how, because alcohol is cut off, but people are bootlegging, I guess, is cut off. But I was struck by the fact that what took people, let's say, jobs to understand that a lockdown, soft or not, besides of the fact of the impact it has on the economy, the impact that it has on an individual and how it is they move, through how they experience the economy in their everyday lives, right? People understood in the first month of the first lockdown that a lockdown for them was not feasible because they were not in those positions to be able to be without jobs and sustain themselves and families because they're already in particular positions. But it takes restaurants having to be closed and not have liquor for particular people living in Camps Bay to be out in droves and to realize that they can't live this way because South Africa is authoritarian, which particular people have always known. So this is just a little bit to frame. And I guess Dorrie said something interesting, we'll talk. So as we talk, more stuff is going to come out. But that's just a little bit of here. And me, I'm a cultural worker. I'm trying to think through this thing very specifically to try and think about my particular role if I understand that what we are in is in a landscape of resistance and it is a battlefield and people are maneuvering and you know what I mean? And we are basically sitting even on a war council, even here, except we're trying to collectivize these war councils and trying to figure out more, more niggly methods, So I'm trying to conceive of myself as a cultural worker. So to understand that I make art, but in what ways can my art serve the resistance? Can my art, serve either depending on what's happening in South Africa, whether the police and the red ants are stepping in to evict people and completely display them stripping performatively people's dignity to prove I don't know what point, but that this is state sanctioned and this is state security. And then where do I fit in all that? And how can I speak? And if I'm going to speak, how must I speak and with whom? And how do I make sure to be speaking together and not just myself. I don't know. Feel free to ask some questions, I guess.
No, I think that's such an erudite encapsulation of what the situation, the situation of South Africa as a concept to begin with, and then the aggregated reality by virtue of COVID in this particular moment, and how that creates such a clear depiction of the stratification of the society as a whole, but Cape Town also as this kind of entry point of colonialism, and how that lives on today and is really embedded into the topography of the city itself, and is really segregated on a structural level, on an intentional level that goes as far back as the late 1800s with Cecil John Rhodes. And on that point, speaking about the way in which on a structural level cities operate to create certain kinds of psychospheres and create certain kinds of indications to people who belongs, who does not belong, who belongs where and in what way. Dorrie, you were recently involved in a new segment with Modi Ndambwe, looking at this legacy of colonial statuary in Brussels in relation to what was then the Belgian Congo and what is today the Democratic Republic of Congo. And in an article that you wrote that accompanied that news piece that we hope will be available to a larger public soon. Look out for it. You write that this kind of statuary operates as a curation of history in support and justification of slavery and colonialism. And I wonder if you can expand on the particular reality on a personal level as someone of African American descent, what that experience is viscerally and personally, and then what you witness from the Afro-diasporic community in Brussels in response to the reality of these curations of history in support of slavery and colonialism.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that's so striking, I mean, for a Black American is the sheer volume of, colonial statuary in Brussels. And as I sort of walked, because now I live in the center of Brussels, so I'm passing, I literally live 10 minutes by foot from this, the Vincott statue of Leopold on the horse that has been beautifully defaced over the course of the past few months. And you just understand from the sheer physicality of the monument that it is meant for people to feel small. It also is meant to show power because he's looking into the middle ground, He's not looking at anyone and also obviously the size of the horse and all the rest of it. But, the backstory of all of that is that, if you're looking directly at the statue, the building to the left, which is now an insurance company, was actually the home of Livingstone, the so-called explorer. On the right is a building where all of the ivory that Leopold was hoarding from the then Belgian Congo was placed in, there was a royal palace space in that building. And it's still a royal building. But the rationale behind it is that once an object goes into a royal house, it can never be, evaluated or reconsidered in the public sphere. So you can't do investigative reporting on, the size of the hoard, how did you get it, what were the circumstances behind, blah, blah, blah. So that's as we flow through this idea of okay, first you kind of come in as a person from the diaspora, knowing all of this sort of, being made aware of this backstory around Leopold. If people don't know anything about Belgium, that's one thing they know. They know about Leopold II, and they know about Patrice Lumumba and, the killing of him. So that's that aspect, and this just understanding that, over the course throughout the city. I mean, one of the things that I also, as a witness, became aware that the volume of this statuary is, in a way, a kind of unspoken, in the public space, telling Black people they have no place. And if they have a place, it's caricature, it's two-dimensional. It has absolutely no value or power in relation to the public space. So you can have something as like derogatory and offensive, but also dehumanizing. I mean, just placing Leopold in that primary space, in a public space, a stone throw. Most people consider or believe that the neighborhood Matonge, which also has a twin city in Congo, is quote unquote the African neighborhood. Obviously, it is not, because the majority of the Black people that go into that neighborhood are being serviced. That is, they buy their food, they buy their fabric, they go there to get, health and beauty products. They have small clubs and cafes, but they don't live in that neighborhood. But what most people are not aware of is that neighborhood is the seat of where the colonial administration, so that Chaussée d'Ixelles, that street, those buildings are the buildings where the administrators, the civil servants of the then Congo Free State worked. So there is this kind of, disconnect around, in a way, the space acts as a conversation of white supremacy with itself. So you have this neighborhood that they've branded as the African neighborhood, but in actuality, it's not a place where Africans actually live, but it's still within sight of this monstrous statue of Leopold, the quote unquote builder king. So it allows them to maintain this space of primacy, of the kind of, how do you put it, like the colonial hangover, right? Of this, so and the positioning can still be maintained. But I mean, the other thing I would argue, and this is also some of it, is that most of the statuary was built anywhere between 12 and 15 years after Leopold's death. So a lot of it too is this kind of, it's an interior conversation that's being played out in the public space with no notion at all that Africans would be in the territory. So that the way that it was never a thought that Black people would be face to face with these and they would take umbrage with their presence. So this is also this kind of, white innocence aspect that gets like cultivated and reproduced. Like, oh, we didn't know. Well, okay, now you know, what are you going to do about it? I mean, that's not a good enough answer. And you certainly were busy, using all the resources to know something about the landscape that you decided to completely, gain your financial and political power from. So it's, I mean, I hope that is somewhat makes some sense. Mm-hmm. But I think, that's the kind of difficulty that you have in Belgium. There's huge lack of resolution within the society. And then you have constantly people And I think, Qondiswa, you probably have this same thing in South Africa. You have like a brigade of humanity constantly saying, this was a good thing. We need to keep this up. This is our reflection in the world. We need to maintain that. And this is the danger, because it runs completely counter to their own documentation, right? Mm-hmm. That's the thing. It's them that wrote the reports. It wasn't the Africans. So they have already been told by their own civil servants what went down. Mm-hmm. So then where is the disconnect here? And it's just willfully structured. It's willfully in denial, willful denial. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's what I have to say on that subject.
Mm-hmm. That's all I got to say on that. Period. Thank you. Thank you so much for that elucidation and that clear vindication of that, or rather that clear explanation of that situation, and that the historical trajectory that has, and then not only the political ramifications, but the affectual ramifications for people that are living their lives here, and how in the white imaginary it was never possible for people of the consequences of that extraction to actually be in the presence of what was extracted and for what purposes. So thank you for making that very beautiful and very, very beautiful and very painful connection to that reality. Qondiswa, you were a really big part of Rhodes Must Fall, the protest that erupted out of the University of Cape Town in 2015, and then further across South Africa, and created a move of what is kind of considered fallism within South Africa, student worker coalition seeking to disrupt and dismantle colonial legacies, like the statue of Cecil John Rhodes in the University of Cape Town. And I was wondering if you could speak to, in the first place, what Rhodes Must Fall was and what it became, and what that protest in relation to that statue of Cecil John Rhodes, what it manifested and what it produced in terms of discourse, but also in terms of movement culture in South Africa. Your mic's off.
I'm coming. Come here. Oh, wow.
Survived.
So it's very interesting to be here now. Recently, a bunch of us who were part of the Rhodes Must Fall movement kind of got in contact again with Rhodes Must Fall from Oxford in London, England, not London, in England. And they're also now doing the same work, I guess, that you guys are doing. They're doing this work, this anti-colonial work, or decolonial work. And it's very interesting to think that it's still the discourse of statues. It's really interesting to me. And frustrating, but yes. So in 2015, at some point, this comrade Kumani threw some shit on a statue of Cecil John Rhodes, but you've got to see the statue. It's parked in this position on campus, looking out over the whole of Cape Town. It's the lookout spot in the city, if you can imagine that. And even when it was being built, UCT is being built in such a way that there's stairs. There's so many stairs that lead up to Jamison Plaza. It's no longer called Jamison Plaza. It's called Sarki Batman Hall or something now. But these stairs that lead up, and before those stairs, you have to walk up this kind of it's been paved, but it's a gradual incline. And the story goes that when Cecil John was commissioning this, and when this was being built, it was so that you would have to do the work of climbing to, up to the halls of the academy. This place that was at a vantage point removed from the people, the masses, etc. And that when it was getting built, this monstrous monument to whiteness, when it was getting built, Black people are now, dragging bricks to the topmost of this mountain, building the statue, building other monuments, roads, monuments there. Black people are falling and dying and are being buried just there, being buried as things are being built on top of. Okay, so when Khumani throws this shit, it's like, it's not a statue, you know what I mean? It's got a history. It's a statue, but it's a history. It's the blood, sweat, and tears. It's apartheid. It's colonialism. you know, it's egregious fascism now. It's neo-colonial, neoliberal democracy. It's capitalism. We understand these things. But that's the action that gets the academy all riled up. Because now, how dare you? Shits, okay? And this is the thing of like scatology, right? Like, and scat interventions. And especially in so-called elite places that considers itself somehow above or something. When you do something like that, like there's a real ruck, like it's disgusting. It smells, it looks gross. It's defecation, it's fecal matter. But what it also is, right? It reveals that thing, that there is this thing which is further out because of the apartheid spatial planning that we were talking about earlier, is that it's further out there so that, you know, the stench of black shit doesn't quite reach the hallowed halls of the academy. But what that action does is it brings it there and forces a kind of conversation. But also at that time, Khumani is also talking about the fact that there's these communal pota-potas, toilets in the townships, in the margins of the city. That people must, depending on where you're based, I mean, there's different areas, but depending on where you're based, sometimes there's no built-in toilet in your own house. Sometimes government RDPs have not been built there. There's not enough, so people have to just take land. And now you must travel in the middle of the night to some midpoint water source with a toilet, you know what I mean? And that a lot of people then, at that point, Helen Ziller, I think, was also the mayor at this point, when people were given pota-potas, which are like, each chamber, man. These things, sorry, it escapes me in English. But it's like a bed chamber, a bedpan. People are given bedpans and told, you know, this is what you can do in the middle of the night. You know, oh, you're scared of violence in the middle of the night. Sure, you can do this undignified something or other. A thing that you would never do in your own home there in the city. Okay. So it's also about that, right? That basic services, right? And that there are people who are in this university who are having to straddle the double consciousness of being from the margins and moving into this academic space, right? Trying to be somehow, I'm kind of mutated into being a better black, but that it doesn't work that way because you feel it. You feel it, man. You just feel it that you are black, or that you have a different kind of sensibility. That the people who look like you, right, are, it's not even that they're in undignified positions, but that the setup of their positions. There's nothing wrong with doing particular kinds of work, but at that time people were outsourced, right? So UCT in that instance has got they've got no accountability, right, to the rate of the employment of the workers, to the hours, to how their bosses treat them, etc. So in some ways, you know, UCT is able to become clean. So this also became part of the students' fight, connecting with workers in that way. All the people who look like you have got a bone to pick with all of the people who are in bureaucracy who don't look like you, okay? Majority of the people who are teaching you do not look like you. You know, like, what does this tell a black child trying to become something? Majority of the kids who look like you are dropping out. If you come out into varsity, into first year, and there's 100 of you in the class, and of that 100, there's like 40 black kids. Next year, there's 20. Okay? In graduation, there's even less. Now in honors, now in masters, there's even less. Okay? So we're being like rooted out. And some of us are being like, I don't know if we're being conditioned to being a buffer zone or something like that. So the stench of black shit reveals a lot of things. But that's what it was. And that's what makes people angry. And that's what makes people start to ask the questions. That will make people start to organize. Then after that, a bunch of students are walking around to different classrooms. Kramer is a campus it's like a campus, you know, universities. People are moving between campuses, going to classrooms, standing outside of campus buildings, like with loud hailers, explaining, holding placards. At first, there were 8 of these people, you know what I mean? And for me, I would even argue that is possibly when the movement potentially starts. Kumani does an action, okay? Does something. We must act, right? But a movement is not a single action of a single person. A movement is gradual, sustained energy that tries to articulate and tries to teach while articulating, or trying to resist, while trying to learn, while trying to grow, all these things. So then people start to bap. Then there's a meeting. After that meeting, there's an occupation. One of these like mass meetings, we go to the admin block. I don't know if you were there, Kopano. We go to the admin block. Then students get inside. Then the whole time we're there, SRC is negotiating with management, but even taking that becomes an extension of that statue. We're saying, okay, we want the statue down. We're going to take this block until the statue comes down. Eventually the statue comes down, but the statue, it's bizarre. It gets like lifted off, covered and saved. We don't even know where it is. That statue is safer than most people who are living in townships in Cape Town today. You know, safer from the law even, you know what I mean? So it gets taken, gets magicked away. Now, this is an interesting thing. 2 weeks ago, so just above UCT campus, if you see UCT, it starts at the base level of the mountain, and then it's a climb up to the mountain. And then further up, there's something called Rose Memorial. And that memorial, it's like some horses. So Cecil John is like this, you know, looking out over everything. There's some lions and some horses and some stairs looking out, lookout point, really now, lookout point. And all of Cape Town can have access to that. Everybody can go there. 2 weeks ago, comrades, I don't know who, but some lit-ass comrades went with I don't know what and removed that thinking head. He's like the thinker, they say so like this. They removed it. They beheaded him. I don't know with what. 2 weeks ago, the guys. And that for me is a true action of a removal of a statue and of it having meaning in and of itself as an action, outside of all of the other things that we mean that we're talking about, you know, the intersection of blackness, of like working class blackness, of femme blackness, of queer blackness, and all of the different kinds of oppressions that we experience. But in our everyday, in our everyday social, as we're like going through buying our groceries, trying to send our kids to school, trying to go to work, but shucks, there's police on the street. Like, you know, just trying to ask neighbor from like sugar from the neighbors, but shucks, there's police on the street. Like trying to build a structure, but shucks, there's police on the street. Like, so people did that. So for me, that even today, it's still about the statue. It's really interesting. Okay. Yeah, so this has traveled somehow. Sorry, that thing really riled me up and got me excited because then I realized, I don't know if you knew that they took off the head of that statue.
Yeah, I saw that thing and I was like, waar is my kop? Laat hom los.
No, people are lit. And it was very, very powerful. But at the same time that thing is happening, there is a mass like land, not issue, but there's mass land occupations that are happening in Cape Town right now, which have been happening, I guess, since. But there's mass land occupations, and that the government, the local government, municipality rather, the DA, is responding. And in Joburg, it's the same thing. And also in Durban, it's the same thing. And there too, the local municipality, which is the national government, the ANC, is also responding. And they're sending in cops. They're sending in red ants. They're just like demolishing. And people are getting arrested like weekly, people who are part of land movement, land occupation movements. And like, so this is happening at the same time that these statute discourses are happening. And then at the same time, there's a group of ex-mine workers who walked from Johannesburg to Cape Town. I don't know if I can explain. I don't know how far that is in Belgium time, but they walked with their feet. And so for them, they started like the day after Youth Day, and it was a freedom walk, and to speak about like, who's got the wealth, who's got the access to the wealth. And that this kind of new dispensation, this new democracy, the rainbow, etc., was basically a sham, so that the rich could keep their money and that a new black elite could be built as a buffer zone. But actually, people are still in exactly the same positions. People are still, you know, but that people now are more hard for, and people are really fighting back. That's one of my key things. And that people are really fighting back. And so for me, it's always very important to be connecting all of these different things and those actions from very long ago and what they birthed, right? And that it wasn't just like three years, like consecutive years of like fighting the establishment and trying to get little gains, trying to insource workers, trying to get like better housing, like trying to drop fees. I mean, free education was then announced, but dollar free education. So, you know what I mean? Like, like people went to prison, like he's since been released as well, but people went to prison for education that's still not free.
Mm-hmm.
And even at that beginning, that roads must fall time, like, and when we were in that occupation, like, it was really incredible and very radical. And there were some radical ideas coming out of that around like that the statue is not the statue. The statue is about a deep rooting of self. And what does it mean for me to belong again to this land? Right. And trying to find ways that the student movement, this quite localized student movement, could open up like little ruptures in a white supremacist system so that there can be like this flowing in between like the working class, the margins, etc., like as we're trying to resist and trying to connect. But I mean, yeah, students, people it's difficult to sustain a movement over time.
No, most definitely.
And now we're in Corona, so it's so difficult, and people are fighting every day. You know, like every day. Sorry, that went downhill. Can you take over?
There's no requirement for sorry. Thank you for doing such an amazing job of mapping what is such a long-standing and complex, layered reality that a lot of people don't make accessible to themselves or don't engage with. And the mammoth task, or the humongous task of being confronted with that daily, and also at the same time being confronted with these possibilities of emergence, these sudden activations and steps toward the reclamation of a relationship with the land. And it makes me think of what you wrote in your paper for the Dreaming Feminist Futures symposium at the University of Cape Town at the Center for African Studies, around the fact that the dialogues around the road statue are not about just that. They were also dialogues around expression, reparative justice, and healing. And I think you've done an amazing job of elucidating how that manifests tangibly, these moments of the reclamation of autonomy and the ability to make autonomous decisions about what life looks like for Black people in indigenous Black territory. And on that point, on the point of reparative justice, on the point of education, on the point of building connections across societal divides of student worker, of anti-colonial versus decolonial versus. Dorrie, in the article that you write in connection to these statues in Brussels, you talk about the way in which this particular moment, or this particular statue of Leopold II in Brussels and it's being defaced, reignites an awareness around a kind of forgotten figure in history, George Washington Williams, who was an African-American journalist who was active during the time of Leopold's campaign. Could you speak a little bit to how George Washington Williams acts as this kind of bridge for the African-American community and the Congolese diaspora here in Brussels?
Yeah, I have to say it was a really beautiful discovery, because a lot of the reflection came initially because of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. So there was a demonstration here in June, early June, and it was it wasn't allowed. The city authorities would not allow for a march, so it had to be a sit-in. So they sat right in front of the Palais de Justice, the court, or the big court in Brussels. But then, and that was peaceful and everything everybody did what they were supposed to do. And then I'm telling you, the soul children decided it wasn't over. Okay. It's not over. So they just walked themselves down that hill to stand in front. And I mean, it was not only like written but performed. I mean, there was music, there was speaking, there was the spoken word, all the rest of this business. But so when I was trying to prepare for this segment for Euronews, I discovered that in fact this George Washington Williams was actually a Black legislator after the Civil War and the emancipation, and then the sort of the antebellum, postbellum period. So he was a legislator, and then he decided at the announcement of the creation of the Congo Free State that he's basically he's a Black capitalist. I mean, he's looking at it as a sort of opportunity because free implies free trade, not the freedom of the people. And so he initially goes there to sort of stake his claim. And also the irony is that he met Leopold before he went to Congo. And he actually liked him. And then he went to the Congo Free State. And within, weeks of his arrival, he starts to see these atrocities. And it's from him that the phrase crimes against humanity is actually coined. He's the one who coined the phrase. He writes Leopold a 10-page letter. And I'll just read you just a small, it's the introduction to the letter. He says, "Every charge which I'm about to bring against your Majesty's personal government in the Congo has been carefully investigated. A list of components and veracious witnesses, documents, letters, official records, and data has been faithfully prepared, which will be deposited with Her Britannic Majesty's Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs." Now you understand, Victoria, Leopold was her uncle, Queen Victoria, right? So you're looking at that as well. "Until such time as international commission can be created with powers to send for persons and papers to administrate oaths, attest the truth, falsities of these charges." And so this is the opening statement from this letter. Now, Williams decides at a certain point that, he puts all of this forward. The reaction was that Leopold then tried to discredit him and spent quite a lot of money and time doing so. But the interesting thing is you have this unknown, it's known, but I didn't know about it. This Black American legislator, and he was also a minister and a community, had a large character within the community, decides to sort of stake his claim, if you will, but with the understanding that this is a man who is only 15 to 20 years out of slavery. So when you see the connectivity is that he goes to Congo thinking that it's going to be a broader opportunity for him, but he has to reflect and a recent cognition of the fact that he's looking at slavery in a completely different geography, but it's even more heinous. So it's like we, as the diaspora, as vast as we are, it's always really compelling to me that in the time where, people were taking up subscriptions to build these huge statues with Rhodes and with Leopold, that there was always resistance, even in the time. So when people are talking about, that happened back then, and it doesn't have to do, the reality is that at the time the objects were being created, there were people resisting, protesting, and creating all sorts of energy to counter this created kind of performative white supremacy and the sort of manipulation of art, because this is the thing that's most terrifying and most upsetting for me, is that some of the objects that have been created in Belgium are absolutely stunning. I mean, they are, as a physical practice of art, they are, but they have been engaged and instrumentalized in some of the most terrifying, deplorable, and destructive acts of humanity, and with even more fervor because it's a Black body. This is what you see as well. The more sort of, glorious past that people want to project, often it's in the largeness comes from the performance of that on Black bodies. And this is what's striking to me. You don't see it with, Casimir Pulaski or Christopher Columbus, or you really see it really laid out in Technicolor when it has to do with the Black body, the misuse, the destructive nature, the complete dehumanization and deconstruction of the Black, not only body, but spirit, mentality, cultural sensibility, everything. It's to grind it into dust. And the thing that's most powerful of all, which is, what we're going to talk about later, is that they never succeed. They never succeed. I'm sorry, but this is not a win that's going to be given. And there are plenty of people of African descent globally who have resisted, who continue to resist, and it can't stop, won't stop. But the fabulousness of it is the beauty, is the creativity, is this kind of baseline humanity that is always standing in contrast. It's always the opposition. This is something that is so intrinsic to the ways in which people of African descent reclaim themselves within these very highly destructive, dehumanizing, devaluing spaces. And that, I think, is, it's like the statement that I made, a few months ago, we were here at the beginning and we will be here until the bitter end.
Come on with it. Period.
I love my people. I love being Black. It is something that is the most treasured part of who I am. Mm-hmm. And nobody will ever make me think anything different. Ever.
Okay. That part. Thank you so much for that reminder, for foregrounding that. And thank you for also historicizing what is a complex history that is devoid or removed from the nuance that it contains, especially in this kind of a strategy of creating this false sense of non-connectedness to this place and a non-connectedness to this history. But the history of Blackness is ubiquitous across the earth. And we don't come from anywhere else but from here. And everything that comes from here comes from us. And I just thank you for that very clear and concise reminder. And I also want to go towards some of the tangible manifestations that arise on a level of collective organizing. Qondi, you were part of, like we said before, Rose Must Fall, and part of many kind of commissions within the movement. And later you were also part of the curriculum change working group that manifested out of Rose Must Fall, out of Fees Must Fall. And I wanted to hear from you, what are some of the interesting collective organization strategies that centralize decolonization and decolonial methodologies that have arisen from these moments of Rose Must Fall, Fees Must Fall, as an artistic practitioner, as well as an education practitioner and cultural worker?
Massive questions. Massive. Just like, oh my God, what are they? Okay. So I always like to I always like to think from myself. It's something lately that, well, not lately. What is it to be between the individual and the collective? So to understand that I am located in a body, and which is a locale for an experience just singular to itself, which nobody else can understand, but that I have a deep desire, even as I am alone, to be and to move with others. So it's always like, for me, about what am I doing, and then with others, and even in the things that I seem to be doing by myself, in what ways am I involving other people? In what ways am I ensuring like that the collective politics are embedded in the thing, you know? So some of the things that we did, so curriculum change working group, this was an interesting kind of like project. So I was in my final year when I was doing research for it, and it was one of the kind of university's interventions after the ruck. And we were working on that in 2017, and 2017 is the last time that the uprising at UCT happened, which isn't to say that like uprisings in other universities across the country don't happen all the time, because they do all the time, and it's just taken a little bit more. It just takes people by surprise when it happens in the Ivory Tower, which is at UCT or at WITS or whatever. So that year we were kind of like trying to have conversations with students to try and talk about what the things were that we were unhappy about, and to try and get to the core of the issues of the protest. So we know we like get up, we rock, we kind of scream about it stuff, but what's contained in that core? What do we mean? What do we want? If we could experiment with things, what could we experiment with? If we could have have honest asks of our lecturers, of our kind of bureaucracy, of our council, etc., what would these things be? And so a lot of the stuff that we kind of like worked with, and a lot of stuff for me, it feels like it's education methodologies, right? And kind of collective learning pedagogies. This is what I've realized. So there's often a lot of facilitations, whether you're thinking of like movements and connecting amongst movements, whether it's like housing collectives, or whether it's about like anti-police work, or, you know, student work. There's always layers of conversations, like thick conversations that happen. So it's become a lot of like discursive based facilitating conversations to figure out what are people wanting, and that when actions do happen, that it's collective and considered actions that people will do together. So some of the things in the curriculum change working group that we did was we sat with students for like months actually, and we were looking at Hidding, which is the arts campus, specifically as a kind of a test group, one of the test groups, just to see, as performance students, what are the things that are actually at issue? And some of the things that we found was it's actually about like learner autonomy. It's that I feel like I can't speak back, that I have no voice, like that I'm just like a guinea pig, and I'm running this fucking thing until they say that like, okay, cool, you can take a break, you know? but that like pretty much that's what it felt like, running a rat race, university. So learner autonomy. And then in that, like, okay, speak freely. What are some of the things? What are some of the things that you would prefer, etc.? So consultative methods with people who are involved. And some of the things that I've like seen since I left university, and this is for me where it became like very interesting, leaving university and still having kind of the energy or the bone for it, for doing the work, for doing the activist work, and trying to figure out where in Cape Town that work happens. And it's so strange. A lot of that work is tied up in housing stuff because of the spatial, geographical, historical stuff in Cape Town, the architectural stuff, the stuff that you guys are talking about that happened over there where y'all are at, but that bled out completely into us and that formed us in very specific ways. It's interesting. Sorry, I just want to do a little bracket of a segue. It's really interesting when you talk about how these statues, they were built without conceiving that the us, the black body, okay, we would be there. And then I thought to myself, not just that we would be there, because I mean we were there, but that we might be free there. That's the thing, that we might be free. And that's when it becomes quite clear, the connections between here and where you guys are at right in Belgium, right? That even here, when they built this thing, they could not conceive of a black body that would not be in chains, that might be able to talk back, right? The black body that's a subject, again, that's autonomous. So like a lot of the stuff in Cape Town like emerges as part of like land justice things. And that is like primarily like for me, my experience of it is from working class grassroots movements, which of course are tied up with a lot of NGOs and a lot of academic spaces, but especially individuals who are moving through and between academic spaces and NGOs, but also moving to the grassroots organizations and collectives, you know. And sometimes people that the funding isn't trickling down to, and sometimes people who don't have choice. So it's that kind of thing of trying to figure out, and maybe this is just because of what's interesting to me. There's lots of different methods that people are using to organize. But it's for me, I'm always interested in trying to move in the spaces where it's like kind of non-hierarchical organizing, or at least grassroots organizing is happening. And that it's like, there's no like, you know, and then somebody decided, these were actions and reactions that emerged from here. And then the people who happen to also be on the ground of the university, because that's also a ground from which to resist, right? Found with the people as they were in that space, particular language to articulate it, right? As the dancers found particular dances to dance about it, as, you know, so there's been, it's really interesting because, oh my God, I've got there's a part of me that I'm like, that I am holding back because I've got a very particular and like bleak and dire kind of outlook in terms of what's happening, what's seeming to happen, where things are going. And then in terms of the multiple strategies that have emerged and that keep emerging, and the ones that we keep recycling as activists, and the stuff, even the stuff, I mean, I imagine you guys are part of it. This webinar is kind of similar kinds of things. Now we're having to organize on digital platforms, but that activism or mobilizing is we mobilize to get together physically. And that even though people are still doing and becoming more comfortable with doing digital platform organizing, there are still people who are getting fucked on the ground. You know, sorry to put it in a particular way. And so trying to figure out like, where is the happy middle ground between, yes, there are strict rules around gathering, etc. And how far can we allow ourselves to push those to keep the government accountable so it doesn't shift into authoritarianism at any point, you know, so that it actually isn't just becoming a thing so that we don't talk to each other. So we're not trying to organize, so they can just be rampant and just, you know, rampantly evicting people and rampantly charging people with things. So like and this is why I think I find it very difficult to answer the question. I'm finding it very difficult. And I feel like I've been speaking to a lot of comrades who I feel like are doing it a lot better than I am. And connecting and doing the Zoom, not just the Zoom webinars and the Zoom screenings, but the Zoom meeting. There's lots of things on WhatsApp, like People are organizing on WhatsApp and trying to connect and share information on WhatsApp, trying to tell each other where to show up to, because there actually are restrictions about movements in place. And it's the same old, trying to get something to fucking trend, so that people start to care about it, But how do we ensure that people care about it beyond the black square? And right there, I am still stuck. And I don't know. Besides the methods that we experiment with, and even this, as understanding this as a collective platform, also, I honestly don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Most definitely. Thank you. And thank you for that very necessary vulnerability of being able to say, I don't know. Because so many times people arrive at these moments with a sense of false clarity and with a sense of false conviction. And my personal kind of like theory about that is it's a replication of the false authority that we've witnessed from the supposed white authority and the supposed cis male, etc., authorities that we replicate onto ourselves and onto our own kind of communities and into our own organizing work. And this is where this idea of emergent strategy, which Adrienne Maree Brown coined, becomes very interesting. Because the way that emergent strategy differs from a kind of planned strategy is that emergent strategy is dependent on the context, and it's about how an unplanned situation or opportunity can create possibilities for growth. So it's really looking, and it takes its inspiration from the plant world, and looking at how in the city you cannot avoid plant life, regardless of concrete, regardless of bricks. Like, those plants are going to grow. They're going to find a way. And in that same way, we find these cracks and these possibilities to emerge with things that maybe we didn't think were possible to begin with. And one of the things that Adrienne Maree Brown says in this book, Emergent Strategy, she talks about how we are in an imagination battle. She says that Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, and Renisha McBride, and so many others are dead because in some white imagination, they were dangerous. And that imagination is so respected that those who kill based on an imagined radicalized fear of Black people are rarely held accountable. Imagination has people thinking that they can go from being poor to a millionaire as part of a shared American dream. Imagination turns brown bombers into terrorists and white bombers into mentally ill victims. Imagination gives us borders, gives us superiority, gives us race as an indicator of ability. And I often feel I am trapped inside someone else's capability. I often feel I am trapped inside someone else's imagination, and I must engage my own imagination in order to break free. And on this topic, on this idea of imagination, I wonder for you, Dorrie, also thinking about the seminal text of Toni Morrison talking about the Black literacy and Black literary tradition and the white imagination, and how limited that white imagination allows for the possibilities of the Black imagination and Black emergence. I wonder for you, and your opinion and in your experience, how important that idea of imagination is in this struggle.
Well, it's highly primary, because the thing is that's with a structure that is in complete denial of your value, or even in the case of the US, of your humanity. The imagination is all you have to counterbalance, or as a counterweight to the imaginary that's being imposed on you, that's actually constricting your possibility. I mean, and some of it is just, this kind of, what we say in Black American folklore, the Brer Rabbit idea. Some of it is about the power of underestimation. And the fact that, because the expectations have been set and everyone's clear about what they are, the underestimation is actually the thing that actually, transports the imaginary. So that we, like, for example, being in an environment where you're not expected to have, Qondiswa, I was similar to you. I mean, I went to theater school and I read about, and I experienced how it was like when you're really excited when you get in there, and then you get in there and you're like, ooh, damn, was I supposed to, this is not working for me. Like, like you're trying to basically break me down so you can build me up in your image. And that was not the purpose of this exercise, right? So then you have to like completely refit like the whole process. Why did you go there? What were your expectations? What were you expecting to get out of it? How were you expecting to realize those things? But the bottom line of that underestimation or whatever is this agency that's the thing. So you talk about the time that you took to go through the process of this education, but at a certain point you understood that they were trying to teach you something, but you also had to figure out like what you were learning, like how, like, and is that really what I want to learn? Like, is that my thing? That might be your thing. And so it's like just having that sort of clarity, agency, self-knowledge, imagination to be able to stop in the middle of a process and say, this ain't working for me. I got to figure out how to get this to work for me, or I need to go. Like in my case, after 1 year, I said, I'm out, I told people, and it's like, really, it's just straight, right? I mean, it's just clear. When you pay the kind of money that you have to pay to go to art school, you're McDonald's, and I'm asking you for a fucking Big Mac. You give me what I am paying for. You don't ask me questions. I don't have to answer to you. This is what this thing is about. So that imagination, that's saying like, like everybody's giving applause because you ended up at this particular school. But, like that agency is also the recognition that, this wide configuration is not running me. I can participate, but I will always have the last word. I will always be the one who determines whether it's working or not. And that's the imaginary, that's the resistance, that's the creativity, that's the aspect within this kind of oppression model that we are constantly undermining. It's a constant undermining. I mean, from, being told, like my sister told me this thing, child, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the song Whistle While You Work. Well, that actually comes from the fact that in Southern train stations, Black women provided the food. And in order to ensure that Black people were not eating the food, they were to whistle while they worked. That's what that's from. So, you start to then understand that from the small to the big, Black people are busy. They found other ways to communicate with each other. Whether it was like tilting their platters a particular way, with the clothing that they wore, whatever. But this oppression framework is in constant motion. And so, but the beautiful ugly, as the Jamaicans say, is that our creativity, our imagination is also working, because the bottom line understanding is that imagination is freedom. That is the freedom. And that's what catapults us into the spaces where we are, and allows us to extend into and really take space. So like Qondiswa was saying about this fabulous reaction of whoever this person was to like decapitate the statue. Well, that was a personal agency. Like that person just said, you know what? Or a group or whatever, however they managed it. Like at a certain point, they said, you know what? That's my name right there. That's where I have to put my signature right there. And I'm doing it. And I don't need anybody to tell me how or why I'm doing it. I know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I know. And we all know. And this is like the work that you do, Kopano, and the work that you do, Qondiswa, the work that I do. You know, there is this constant understanding that you are an individual being. You have a right to that. You never, ever, no matter what the activism you're engaged with, the fact is you have the right and the obligation to have clarity about yourself within that framework, regardless who you're interacting with. And it's only through that clarity that you can actually engage with a collective that is really non-hierarchical, that's truly grassroots, that really presents people and places people in positions where they can actually thrive to the end and the progress of us all. But it has to start first with the individual. And that sometimes as a community and as a people, we're not prepared to give people the time to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think we really need to do that, because that's what also allows, you know, kind of hinders a certain kind of progress, a certain kind of flow, because everyone's not at the same point. But there has to be enough space and enough breadth and time for everyone to be able to filter in and really make their contribution. And everybody's not the same. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And thank you for like bringing our attention to the multiplicities of the imaginary scape, and how it's only in that kind of imaginary work that we can conceive of multiplicities that are outside this the dominant structure of enforcing a kind of monologic or an ultimate bottom line reality. I want to bring our attention to the fact that we are at about 10 minutes towards the end of our time. And so I want to encourage...
Overtalk.
Cannot get enough. But I want to encourage anyone who's watching, who has any questions, please send them into the Q&A. This is the moment. And I want to bring us slowly towards closing statements from Qondiswa and Dorrie. And I'm thinking that maybe it's interesting to once again return to Adrienne Maree Brown and the way that she talks about emergent strategy. She really bases it in the work of Octavia E. Butler, a preeminent Black American science fiction writer. And in talking and thinking about science fiction as a way to think about movement culture and creating systems, she says that science fiction is simply a way to practice the future together. And I suspect that what many of us are doing are practicing futures together, practicing justice together, living into new stories. It is our right and responsibility to create a new world. And so I wonder for you, Qondiswa, in this way of thinking about these rehearsals for a certain kind of futurity, whether it be a Black futurity, a queer futurity, an unnamed futurity, what some of that future looks like to you.
For me, I like to go back sometimes to, I've said this to you before, Kopano, Jose Esteban Munoz, he speaks about utopia at the vanishing point. And there he speaks about queerness. He idealizes and theorizes around the potential or the futurity of queerness. And he speaks about queerness is not yet here, you know, and that's place on the vanishing point of a horizon that you reach towards, but you never quite get there. So for me, in trying to think of futures, because me and Kopano are literally the generation of a future. Like, we are a dream's future, and we have arrived and realized that we are not living like a traditional kind of romantic story where, they like remove the chains and then we were free. And then in the future we were free. That's not what happened. It's a tragedy. It's, Antigone stuck in a tomb. So to try and kind of like ward off that kind of thing, where I might arrive at a future and think that I'm finished and think that what I have done is enough for the people that will come after me. It's always quite difficult. But how do we reimagine a future without capitalism, guys? That's just... And the entire matrix that capitalism is connected to. And we know that coloniality and capitalism are linked. I don't even think that they're cousin. They're like twin. They're overlaps. We know that it's a natural evolution of the other. And you can't speak about one without speaking about the other. But sometimes I hear people doing so, strangely. But in what ways are the material conditions of people's lives tied to a plan, a historical economic plan to keep particular people in power and particular people starving on the margins, breaking their backs to keep them happy, to keep their coffers full. So like, what is that future where all of that wealth is redistributed and flat and there are no people standing above other people? I don't know what that looks like, right? And what can we learn from the actions of that people are doing to the statues, right? What does it look like to take down the statue? But what is the statue representing right now? Who are the people? The 13, the 100. Right now, if I'm looking at South Africa, Oppenheimer and it's Rupert Oppenheimer and it's Rupert and Oppenheimer. These two families, these two men, they donated like R500,000 each for a COVID. Like, how does a white family, have 500 million rand each, right? That they're going to loan to the country that South Africa is going to pay back. Oh, without interest, so we must be happy. But that we're still going to have to pay back money that they looted in the first place. What does it look like to bring down that statue? What's that future where that 500 million is rightfully back in the hands of the people who work for it, right? If we're thinking of factories, mines, the places where people work that are producing the things that systems are standing on, what does it look like for people to be making collective decisions around what happens with the goods that their labors, that their hands produce? What does that look like? And what does it look like for people to have service delivery, but that they're okay, there's maybe, these are my futures, okay, there are electricians who are around here. But it's not people who are tied to some vague, fakeless municipality or government. It's people who are in the community, who are building a community together, who are contributing to the community, right? And who are contributing in the decision-making, not just once every 4 years, once every 2 years in local and municipal elections, right? What does it look like? Active participatory democracy, not this representative democracy. So just some couple of things. What I know is that like the kind of democracy that we have right now in South Africa, it's like capitalism's band-aid, so we will keep working. That's kind of how I feel. So what does it look like for more? Mm-hmm. I guess that's what you asked me, Kopi. I ask it back. What does it look like?
And I love questions, and I love that the answer is a question, because inbuilt into that response is that that there is no finality. That what is not an ideal is not a full stop. The ideal is possibility. The ideal is more questions, and the ideal is the possibility to keep asking questions and to not have those those questions have consequences that are graver for some than they are for others. And so I appreciate so deeply that level of precarity, of slipperiness, of an evasion of a full stop, or an evasion of an answer, to say, no, the future is a question. And in the future, I am questioning. In the future, I am. I am. So I really appreciate that, Qondi. And I'd like to direct the same question towards Dorrie.
Ooh, child. I don't know. The thing is that, it's different for me too, because, I'm like the last end of the boomers. Right? So, like when John Lewis was sitting at a lunch counter in Nashville, I was born. Right? So for me, I stand with feeling like, the two of you are like gifts to me. I mean, your knowledge is extraordinary. Your insightfulness, your thoughtfulness is just like a gift. Your commitment to the work, not only of yourself, but within your community and for all of us, and the openness and the willingness to teach people like me, people of my generation who absolutely adore you, but like my friend Bonnie Greer says, we're the ones that built the structures. We're the ones that made it binary. So we don't have this language that you've had to fight for in order to say, I'm here. Like, you're not going to walk away from me anymore. I'm here. You're going to call me what I need you to call me. And that's it. But that's working like, I mean, it's like you're being pummeled every time you say, I'm this, stop, I'm this, like, honor me. And so for me, it's like, for me to square the circle with the love that I have and the sort of challenging nature that you both provide for me, but also to kind of be able to say, let's look at some stuff that actually worked, even for a particular time, and see where we can actually take the best of what we know. And that's, for me, how the reimagination will happen, because it's a necessity of actually, learning and teaching. Just because I'm the age I am, I'm 56, doesn't mean I know shit. I mean, about a non-binary fluid existence. I don't. I come from a binary existence. I need you to teach me that. I need to know the language around that. I need you to tell me why it's important that I internalize to the molecular this presence. And I want that because of how much value you have to me. And I will not advance unless I do that work. I cannot be a part of your family and say, well, that doesn't matter. No. If I'm not doing it, how can someone else accept and do, or take the responsibility to do? It's my work. And that's what I think is the challenge now, is that we really need to get in multi-generational conversations, because there's so much that, my generation doesn't know, but this shit still works for us. Okay? Like, the boomer is still rolling bins, baby. Okay? So unless the soul children get in and say, no. You are my family, and you're going to sit down in that chair, and you're going to learn this stuff so that we're as strong as we can possibly be. If you don't know, you're the weakest link. And that's what's going to send everything to hell in a handbasket. So this is the thing for me, the reimagining. I mean, why do we love Toni Morrison? It's because she was time traveling. She was time traveling. She was going back, and then she was going forward again, and then back again, and then underneath and up above and hovering, and then coming back down again. she was absolutely uncontainable. But it's because of how open her mind was. And the fact that she was incredibly demanding of herself and also of her readers.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it's really about this connectivity that we have as, Black people, people of African descent, but also acknowledging that we have blind spots and gaps. And there's no shame in that. It's that we need to teach each other what the other needs to know. Mm-hmm. And that's how we'll advance. And that's how we imagine. And that's how I believe we actually do, like you say, Qondiswa, get to the vanishing point. That's how we get to the vanishing point. Mm-hmm. Because we have to be robust enough. And that comes from really in the feeling place, in the molecular, having the knowledge, the depth of feeling that if something happens to you or Kopano, somebody might draw back a nub on me. And they might take my life, but they won't forget me. And they won't forget you. And that's what this is. That's what this is. Love you.
Thank you so much for, I don't think there's a way to contain that. So thank you.
Yeah. I love you, darling. I love you too, Qondiswa.
Thank you so much. I want to close with a quote from Adrienne Marie Brown, the author of Emergent Strategy. And she says that you must remember that you are water. Of course, you leave salt trails. Of course, you are crying. Flow. P.S. If there happens to be a multitude of griefs upon you, individual and collective, or fast and slow, or small and large, add equal parts of these considerations. That the broken heart can cover more territory. That perhaps love can only be as large as grief demands. That grief is the growing up of the heart that bursts boundaries like an old skin or a finished life. That grief is gratitude. That water seeks scale. That even your tears seek the recognition of community. That the heart is a front line and the fight is to feel in a world of distraction. That death might be the only freedom. That your grief is a worthwhile use of your time. That your body will feel only as much as it is able to. That the ones who grieve may be grieving you. That the sacred comes from the limitations and that you are an excellent at loving everything. I want to thank everyone who's joined us this evening to get into conversation with us, to witness this conversation, to hold space for this conversation. And I want to thank especially Dorrie Wilsonf, Qondiswa James. You have been a fantastic team to guide this conversation with. This is our last In the Soup online of the summer, and we'll be returning in October. And in the interim, I wish everyone a safe summer or a safe winter wherever you are in the world. And I hope that we can build our futures to the possibilities that our imaginations extend to. With love and belief in the revolution, I wish you all a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful evening. Big love, big love, big love. Beautiful.
Wonderful. Talk soon. Take really good care of yourselves. I love you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Love, big love.
Bye, love.
Bye bye.